My mother was addicted to crack cocaine and was never there for me. I had to raise myself and my brother because of my mother's addiction, and this forced me to grow up at a very young age. My mom went to prison for drug-related crimes, and I moved in with my father. I was removed from my father and placed in the state's custody at age 11. From that point on, I was bounced around from institutions and foster homes. At the age of 18, I was released from state's custody and moved back in with my mother. Not long after that, I was in a major car accident in which I suffered a severe head injury and my ear was torn off. I was dead when the ambulance arrived, but they were able to revive me. I flatlined again in the ambulance and once more at the hospital, but as you can see, they were able to revive me. I was unable to attend school for a year because of my injuries, but I was able to return and graduated with high honors. The day after I graduated, I found out that I was pregnant, and I moved out on my own and gave birth to my son in 2008. 3 years after my son was born, I was involved in an abusive relationship and began using drugs to numb my painful emotions. I became addicted to heroin and cocaine, and this led me to losing custody of my son. I became even more depressed because of that, and my addiction got even that much worse. I eventually lost my housing, my car, and pretty much everything I owned. I was able to leave that abusive relationship, and 2 years ago, I met my current boyfriend, Neil, who I brought here tonight. I continue to struggle with my drug addiction and cutting. In January this year, I was actually hospitalized with a bacterial infection in my heart that was caused by my drug use. Against doctor's orders, I checked out of the hospital early to use drugs. I just continued to get high, and about a week after leaving the hospital, I overdosed on crack. My life flashed before my eyes, and I knew I was at my lowest point. I prayed to God for the strength to get through it, and I survived. Fortunately, one of the foster homes I lived in as a child was the home of Bobby, Joe, and Jody Knights. They introduced me to the church in Jericho. As I grew up, I maintained contact with the Marcotts and Ziders, even though I did not attend church very often. Late in 2012, I felt like I needed to return to the church and asked Neil to come with me. He agreed, and we attended a few services together. I stopped going, but he continued to attend regularly. I watched him become increasingly more connected with God, and he changed dramatically. Seeing how he was affected over the next year made me curious about whether God was really real and what he could do for me. I went to church with him off and on, but most of the time I just felt really anxious and wanted to leave. I stared at the floor and rarely took in the pastor's message. I felt like I was just too far gone for God to help me or care about me. I was convinced that God didn't want me after all the things I had done. After I overdosed, I realized that I couldn't do it on my own anymore. I had made him a promise that if he saved my life, I would seek him. I began talking with Neil about God, and a few weeks later, I went with Neil to church. Even though he usually goes to Jericho, on this one night we went to Burlington. I had never met Brother Lyon before, but I felt like he was preaching a message that was all about me. Neil introduced me to the Lions after service, and Brother Lyon looked me in the eye and said, "You know what you need to do." I looked away, but he put his hand on my shoulder, looked at me in the eye again, and repeated, "You know what you need to do." My heart dropped. I was in awe that he could sense what I was going through and what I needed. And if you are familiar with Brother Lyon, you'll know what I'm talking about. I knew something was about to drastically change in my life. We went back to the Burlington church again the following Sunday night. I felt like God was telling me to go up during the altar call and pray. I had never done that before. While I was up there, I was lost in God's presence. I could feel him holding my hand while I prayed. I saw an image of an angel. I felt a sudden sense of warmth come over my body, and I saw a bright light, even though my eyes were closed. I felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. I had been up there praying for an hour, but it seemed like only a few minutes. I opened my eyes and felt like a whole new person was about to come out. I told Bishop McAllister about my experience, and he predicted that the following Sunday I would receive the Holy Ghost. I was excited and determined to go to church with Neil that Sunday morning. Unfortunately, things didn't go quite as smoothly as we all thought they would. Apparently, Satan wasn't quite ready to let me go yet. I relapsed the night before church. Still, I forced myself to attend. I was pretty out of it throughout the service. I was extremely angry during the service because I continued to listen to Satan's lies. I believed, once again, that God didn't want me and didn't love me. I didn't receive the Holy Ghost and stormed out of the church, angry at God, Neil, and the world. However, I still felt God calling me. I knew that I had to go with Neil to the district conference the following Sunday night. I walked in the door of the church in White River and I felt a change come over me. It was like my walls were torn down. I saw Brother Lyon and I told him that I was hoping to get the Holy Ghost. He turned around and said that tonight was my night and not to leave until I prayed through. I felt unsure about what he had said, but when worship started, I found myself dancing and singing my heart out. I felt like a whole new person. I was completely confused as to what was going on and who this person was. Everyone who saw me there saw something was very different too. I went through the prayer line and prayed at the altar with a group of people. Some I knew and some I didn't. There were a lot of people praying for me and I received the Holy Ghost. That was 10 weeks ago. It has been a real roller coaster since then. I haven't been perfect, but I can tell you that I have been doing the best I ever had my entire life. I have stayed away from drugs, and now I go to church regularly. I look forward to Bible study and continue my walk with God. I have come to know what it means in Jeremiah 29:13. And you will seek me and find me when ye shall search for me with all your heart. I have stumbled along the way. What this has taught me is that I can't do this all on my own. I am learning to stop relying on my own willpower and turn to God. I also need to let the supports that God has put into my life help me. I see now that God was reaching out to me through them. The Marcotts, the Ziders, the McAllisters, the Lions, and many others. I am determined to seek God, to do my best to live for God, to find out what His purpose is for me, and to continue on this journey and see what else He has in store for me. No matter how many times I stumble along the way, I am determined to get back up and go at it again, full force. Nothing is going to stand in my way of my relationship with God. I am no longer going to let Satan control me. God will always be there to help me back up when I fall. I never imagined that I would be where I am at today. But remember, all things are possible with Christ who gives me strength.
Something beautiful, something good, and all my confusion, He understood.